Hey, Sam here. I'm going to be giving you an introduction to mobile CSS and how we can build websites that look great on your phone. Uh, so, what's the motivation for this? So obviously in 2020, people have lots of different types of ways to access the internet. They can use their phone, they can use a tablet, they can use a big laptop, a small laptop, a huge 4K ultra wide monitor, like an old monitor, like a TV. There's so many things that users can do to access the internet. And often your users of your website are going to be using multiple different devices. And just like you want to make an amazing website for your users, it can't be amazing if it doesn't respond to the type of device they're using. And as we know, obviously a lot of internet consumption these days is happening on mobile. These are some stats from, I'm not exactly sure where, but it would depend on exactly what company you're working at, what kind of application and market you're targeting. But mobile, it's pretty safe to say, it's really big and it's not going away. And neither is desktop. So often as a web developer, you will need to support both. So we're going to go a deep dive today on how you would be able to support both mobile and a desktop site. But often there'll be other ones. You might have a tablet. You might have like different tablet support features, all sorts of things that you could possibly do. But we'll just focus on the big two for now because the skills are the same. Sweet. So what is one way that you could support mobile? Well, you build a desktop version of your site. Maybe you could just make a second version for mobile. And this has its pros and cons. And this is a way that some people do it. So for instance, if you take Facebook, there's www.facebook.com, and that's what you open on your desktop. But if you're on your phone, you go to m.facebook.com, and it shows like a different version of Facebook it's more mobile. It's only got one column. It doesn't have all the sidebars. It's great. So that's one way to do it. There's pros and cons to the way that Facebook does it, and other websites also do it the same way as Facebook. The pros is that it's way more optimized for mobile. Because you're making a separate website, it can be done by a separate team, usually with a separate code base, and maybe with separate designers. The separate designers can make things that look just great for mobile and are like a really optimized mobile first experience. It's possible to build different UX flows. So for instance, if you were building like Instagram, you're probably going to want it to be really different on mobile to desktop, because on mobile you can take pictures, and on desktop, you don't have a camera on the back, so you're not going to go around and snap Instagram photos with your laptop. That'd be a bit weird. It's also way easier to debug because they're two totally separate code bases. Instead of having one code base that's doing so many different things, you just have one code base that's always doing mobile and one code base that's always doing desktop. That's really easy to think about. Obviously, though, there are cons. The biggest con being you now have two code bases. And that can take a lot of time. That can mean that there needs to be more people working on the project. It costs more money. But it can also be a real headache for maintenance of the project. I'm sure you guys might have experienced this maybe with a bank application, for instance, where there's some features that are available on their desktop website, but are not available on their mobile website, or vice versa. And that can really annoy your users, and it can also it can be really annoying to have to double up the work whenever you want to do any change to the website. Another problem is that it's really hard to redirect people between the mobile and desktop sites. So on the mobile site, you want to be able to load, www.facebook, and it will redirect you to m.facebook, and vice versa on desktop. But getting that right can be really hard, and if you redirect people to the wrong version, they can get the wrong experience. And especially when the experiences are quite different, as you often would do if you're making a separate mobile site, the users can be really annoyed that they get the wrong version. And the third, and this is actually really interesting, is SEO problems. So if you're building, so SEO is search engine optimization. That's making it easy for Google to find your website and making sure that your website ranks highly in Google, being in other search engines. When you have an M site and a www site, that means you have two URLs for the same content. So for instance, in Facebook, there might be m.facebook.com/Sam's Amazing Birthday Party and www.facebook/Sam's Amazing Birthday Party. And this can be quite confusing for Google because it can think that there are then two different Sam's Amazing Birthday parties that are happening at once. And all of the amazing signals that it gets to try and rank one page, that can get split across two pages. And so the 2 pages might rank like in the middle of the list, instead of if they were the same page, they'd rank at the top of the list. Obviously, that's not an issue for Facebook because it's not putting my events on Google, which I'm very happy about. But if you are a business that is more, where SEO is more of an important requirement, then that can be a real non-starter for having a separate mobile version. But there is an answer, and it's called responsive. So responsive websites is a kind of a newer phenomenon, and that's a way to build a website, one single website that looks good on both mobile and desktop using CSS to apply different styles depending on what device you're on. So the pros of this is obviously time, because we're just making some CSS changes. It's maybe like 10, 20% more work instead of double the work to make 2 websites. And additionally, it means because we're sharing one code base, it's much easier to have the same functionality and across every device that the website is used on, because they're the same code base fundamentally. The cons is that you have to have extra code in that code base, and it's also extra complexity. It's more to test, it's more to think about when you're changing the code, because you have to think, oh, I'm changing this code, is this going to break how it looks on mobile? You might have to test things twice, that's extra work. It's also harder to make things exactly high quality user experience on mobile, because you're probably like trying to retrofit what you got on desktop onto mobile, or vice versa, and trying to share as much as you can, rather than coming at it in kind of a clean room, like 2 separate teams, thinking about how do we make it on mobile, how do we make it on desktop. So it might not be as high quality of a mobile user experience. But responsive websites is kind of the biggest trend in the industry right now. It's what a lot of companies are doing. So that's what we're going to have a look at today in this Prezzo. So what is the technology that allows us to have different CSS on devices? This technology is called media queries. So a media query is like an if statement in CSS. What's happening here? Here's an example CSS file. You can see it on the screen in the purple. We've got some normal CSS rules here. We've got like, for something with a class article, we apply this padding. And then we have an at media. And what this is basically like an if statement, but it's an if statement on the device, the browser that the user is using right now. And so we say, if the device is larger than the minimum width of 600 pixels, and then we apply these extra styles. And so the way that the browser kind of interprets this is it's if that's not the case, so if we have a 500 pixel wide device, it just simply ignores everything that's in there and doesn't apply it. If that is the case, it's basically just deleting like the media query and just applying these styles as well. So these styles are, so in the case that it is over 600 pixels, both the padding 510 and the padding 1020 would apply. But since the media query, the styles in the media query are contained later in the CSS file, they're given a higher priority. So that would override the original styles and we'd end up with 1020. That can be a bit much to take in. So I'm going to change tabs and I'm going to show you a quick demo I prepared earlier. Here we go, sweet. So I have a div article here, just like in the example, and I have a P with some text. And as you can see, it's just a normal HTML page. I can resize my browser window, and it's the text is changing in width, and it's all normal. Got some CSS, got a border, I've got a background. It's pretty cool. Now, if I uncomment the media query, initially we're not going to see anything happen because our media query here is min width 600. So it only applies to browser windows or devices that are larger than 600 pixels wide. And in this case, it's not, it's 500 or so. So it's only applying the styles here. But if I were to make this larger, we now see that it's also applying the styles in the media query. So in addition to our padding, border, and background, we've applied a width 500. So that's why it's not taking up the whole width anymore. And we've applied a margin auto. So that's why it's kind of centered. But we've also, what we've done here, and this is really important, we've applied a background goldenrod. And because this media query is later, and the browser's interpreting, we match the media query. So it's basically, it's just the CSS file with these two classes, article with background light blue, and then article with background goldenrod. And since goldenrod comes later, it wins. And as we can see, the background is now goldenrod. So just to drive home that point, I'll show you what would happen if we put the media query above the default styles. So see, just with the default styles, it's not nothing's happening. If we put the media query ahead, we see we get the width changes because there's no other width. We get the margin because there's no other margin defined. But because light blue is the last background defined, that's what wins. So you just got to remember that basically you want to put your media queries after your default styles for an element. That's really important. So we've basically got default, and then we've got if, and then we have all the additional things we want to do if that statement is true. So sweet. So now we see how media queries work. Let's dive into what conditions we can do. Because it's like an if statement. You can put code in an if statement. You can put code outside an if statement. But the cool thing about if statement is what you can put in the condition block. So two types of conditions. We've got media types and we've got media features. Media types are very simple. There's 4 of them. There's a couple of legacy ones, but we won't dive into them. There's all, matches everything. Print matches when you Control P, try and print your thing on like physical paper like this. Like it's amazing. Print's pretty cool. We've got screen, which matches what I'm doing right now. I'm looking at this beautiful presentation on the screen. And then we have speech synthesizers. So if someone's using like text to speech, if they're using accessibility features, then that would apply. Then we have media features. So media features are kind of the main things you'll be using. So these are not mutually exclusive like a type. Something can be more than 500 pixels wide and it can support hover. So that's why we call them features instead of types. So we got, for instance, we have max width, which would match anything that is below that max width. So it would match, so over here, we got max width 500 pixels, which would match things that are 500 pixels and narrower. And that, for instance, would be a phone in portrait orientation. We have min width, which will match things that are that many pixels or wider. So if I have min width 501 pixels, that would match something that is 501 pixels and wider. For instance, a phone in landscape orientation, or a tablet, or this computer, in fact. And then we also have we got all sorts of different types. You can search them up, like search them on MDM, just search up media queries, look at media features. We got, for instance, hover, which if the primary input method supports hover, that's kind of cool. If you wanted to, for instance, show something slightly different if the user was using a touch screen and they didn't support hovering over things. We've also got preferences, so we can use prefers color scheme. If someone's using a modern laptop and they have like dark mode toggle, we can make our website look dark too. There's also like prefers reduced motion, which is really important for accessibility, and like prefers high contrast stuff. So yeah, media features, they're pretty cool. But min and max width are probably the ones you can use the most because that is most relevant to making stuff scale for small devices such as phones. Awesome. We can use multiple criteria. It's like an if statement. You can use ands in your if statement. That's pretty cool. We skipped one. We can use a not, but it's really important to notice that the not does not make sense. It's not exactly the same as in JavaScript. That is because it inverts the whole query, not just the screen. So you might read this, and this is wrong, don't read it like this, and you might read this as saying, when it's not a screen and the minimum width is, but that's not how you should read it. You got to read it when it's not a screen with the minimum width and the orientation portrait. Imagine if the not applies to all of it. So that's just an important thing to be wary of. It's often more idiomatic to avoid using not because of this quite counterintuitive behavior if you're used to not in any other programming language. You can combine queries. So this media query will match if it's print or the screen with a minimum width of 320 pixels. It's cool. It's like an or. Yeah, so we've talked a lot about minimum and maximum width, but what are we talking about the minimum and maximum width of? The viewport. So the viewport is the area that your page has to render inside the browser. It's the area, pardon me, on a desktop, that's the area of your browser window, but on a mobile phone, that's probably the area of your device. It's really important to note that the viewport is in CSS pixels. While modern phones, for instance, might have like 4K screens or something ridiculous. That 4K screens, like what's over 2,000 pixels wide. Your viewport might only be 500 pixels wide, and the reason that is because on super high resolution devices, what they'll often do is they'll map one CSS pixel actually represents like 2 physical pixels wide, for instance. So that's a little bit, it can be a bit confusing to start, but what that means is that the pixel widths of devices of different physical widths are actually relatively consistent. If we say, if we target things that have like a width of less than 500, that'll actually include almost every phone that's manufactured, even though we now have far higher resolution phones. That'll include all the way back from like iPhone 1 all the way to whatever 4K amazing phone you've got, because they have these like hardware scaling factors, and we don't have to think about that as developers. That's really good. Also mobile view, so I've got an example here with some different viewports. So phones being like less than 600, tablet portrait being between 600 and 900, and then desktop being kind of above 1,200. But obviously, this is kind of something you'll have to do some research about your own users, or just stick with best practices such as this one. It's really interesting though on mobile to realize that the viewport can be a bit complex. So we're going to get on to our next subject, which is the viewport meta tag. So on mobile, and I'm going to have to transport you guys back to when they were making the original iPhone. The web was not ready for mobile websites, and just like if you have a text box and you shrink it down a lot, it wasn't going to look really good if they told the truth to big desktop websites about mobile, about the viewport width. So what they did is mobile browsers such as Safari on iPhone or Chrome on an Android phone, by default, it will render the page about 3 times zoomed out. So the original iPhone was 320 pixels wide, but it presented in the browser that it had a 900 pixel wide viewport. So the web page was rendered as if it was on a 900 pixel wide window, and then it was just zoomed out to fit on the iPhone's screen. Obviously, this is really good for backwards compatibility, but if you're making a modern website, you don't want this behavior. So that's where our first viewport meta tag comes in. This is not even really a specification, it's just kind of something that exists that Safari and Chrome support, and that's all good because that's that they're the mobile browsers. So you add viewport meta width equals device width, and that tells the browser to not lie to you, to give you the correct width, and Bob's your uncle and you're good. So when you add this on like an iPhone, for instance, it'll say that it's like 300, 400 pixels wide, which makes sense, rather than lying about being like 900 pixels wide and then zooming you out. So this first one here, you want to add it to every website you make. That's important. This is just some stuff you can copy paste, and you'll use it on every website that you make, basically. The bottom one is kind of an example of how the viewport tag is a bit more advanced than that. So there are some other features. The support varies between devices. So for instance, you could restrict zooming so that people can't zoom too much. You might not want to do that. It could make your site inaccessible, but it's something to consider, and it's just a good thing to know that you have that feature available if you need to restrict zooming or other kind of viewport actions on your website. So the other thing that's interesting, so we learned about media queries, which lets us apply different CSS rules based on the viewport, and we've learned about how the viewports are kind of a bit of a lie, but are really nice that give you this almost consistent, like across every device in the world, one CSS pixel represents a reasonably small range of physical widths. Sometimes we might want to use this viewport when we're designing a layout. So for instance, we might have an image and we don't want it to take up more than a screen full. So, I'm laying out like an article, for instance. I don't want the user to have to scroll all the way through a photo of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I just want it to be one screen so that they can scroll past it quickly. And so we can use VH and VW to do that. So VW is a percent, it's like percentage. So 100 VW is equal to the width of the viewport, and 100 VH is equal to the height of the viewport. So I can just use those units in CSS, width, height, wherever I would use pixels or percentages usually. The only caveat though is that on mobile, they can be, and actually even on desktop, they can be a bit counterintuitive. So on mobile, often like the URL bar, will disappear as you scroll down on the mobile screen. And 100 VH actually is 100 VH is the height of the viewport when the URL bar and all of the other scrolling stuff is hidden, which is a little bit confusing. So it means if you have a 100 VH element, the user, when they first load the page and the address bar is visible, they're not going to be able to see all of the element. You can use percentage here, but percentage does come with a caveat that percentage changes as the height of the viewport changes based on the scroll. So if you're trying to make something fill the entire screen on mobile, you cooked and you have your work cut out for you. So that's something that you need to research. Also, on desktop, on some platforms such as Windows, the scroll bar takes up some width, and 100 VH, 100 VW and 100 VH do include the width of the scroll bar. So, like if you make something 100 VW, but you have a vertical scroll, then it's actually going to be wider. It's going to add a horizontal scroll bar because now the page is slightly too wide to fit inside the scroll bar. So yeah, viewport units, they're a thing. They're useful sometimes. They're just, yeah, they're not going to solve all of your problems, I suppose. Sweet. But so we talked a lot about the different viewport units, ways to apply CSS like if statements with the @media query based on the viewport. But it can be very hard to test on those different viewports if you don't have 1,000 phones on you, which I don't, unfortunately. So I'm going to tell you this amazing tool. It exists in Chrome, it exists in Firefox, and it is this little like mobile device icon in DevTools that let you change mobile device. So I let you change the viewport. It lets you also choose from predefined devices. You don't have to remember the size of the icon. That's really convenient. And it also lets you change orientation and do some more advanced stuff like change device pixel ratio. If you're doing like Canvas game development, you probably won't need it now, but it's good to know that it exists. So I'm going to jump into Chrome for the second demo today, and I'll show you how to use that. I've actually already opened it. All right. Well, I'll open it again. So go into inspect element. I've already opened it. It's this little button here. So this is normal. This is what you're familiar with. It's next to the little grabber. Click the toggle device toolbar. Exactly the same icon in Firefox. It's almost exactly the same feature. And as you see, the website's gotten squashed. I can now see less of it, and it looks like a phone. There's two important controls in Chrome that you've got to use. One way you can do it is you can come to this little drop down here. You can choose some device presets such as iPhone X, and now it is the size that it would be on an iPhone X. It's important to note that this is basically just resizing the window for you. It's not actually emulating an iPhone X. So like if I click on something, it's not going to open the keyboard. It's also not, it's not putting the notch, which is a bit unfortunate. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Yeah, it's not putting the notch, which is a bit unfortunate. Yeah, but you can change between different devices. You can test it on an iPad. Wow, it looks different on an iPad. And that's exciting. And then there's also these guys up here, which you can click to change the width. Bit of different UI. It's really cool. You can drag it too. It's very aesthetically pleasing. All right, so that's the little mobile device tool, and that's us for today. So today we've learned how we can use @media. So we've learned why we want to create a mobile website and why we want to make it responsive, so we don't have to do two separate code bases. We've learned that we can use @media queries to kind of do an if statement and apply CSS conditionally based on the device. We've learned about the viewport size and how it's actually kind of consistent across devices, even though screens are totally different quality, which is a little bit insane. We've learned there are viewport units and that you might not want to use them because there are a couple caveats around mobile. And we've also learned how to use the little device tool in your Chrome or Firefox DevTools to preview what your website would look like on different size devices. All right, so have fun being mobile responsive.